So Andy Gibb is the public education coordinator for dementia-friendly communities for the Alzheimer's Society of Brant, Haldeman, Norfolk, Hamilton, Halton. A lot of H's there, right? Andy's previous roles were in Scotland, where he is from, and included a senior residential care worker, community nurse, and university lecturer in health and social care. Andy has spent many years with the National Health Service. I took advantage of that back in my hippie days when I had something happen in England. Anyway, he's been working with individuals from all walks of life and all different backgrounds, and partnering with various organizations in his role for the benefit of his patients and service users. Having now moved to Canada, his goal within the Alzheimer's Society is to make more friendly, dementia-friendly communities by working in partnership with businesses, councils, organizations, and services to enhance awareness, reduce stigma, and implement practical strategies to support those living with dementia. So take it away, Andy. Ta-da.
Thank you very much. I've been doing this now for a year today. I've done over 100 presentations, and that's the best introduction I've had so far. Thank you very much indeed for that. So yeah, my name's Andy Gibb. I want to talk to you about dementia-friendly communities and why we're doing this. We're in a situation just now around the world where care homes are full, day centres are full. There's more and more people living in the community with dementia. And it's going to get worse. There is going to be higher numbers that I'm going to talk about in a little while, that we need to be more aware of this. My goal since I took this job a year ago is to try and make sure that there is more awareness being spread throughout my region. And I cover that whole region that David mentioned there. I want to get to the stage that when Mrs. Smith, who's living with dementia, goes to Walmart, and if she drops her purse at the cash desk, my goal is that the person that's serving her thinks, she may be living with dementia. I need to give her a little bit of support, rather than just push her to one side in order to serve the next person, which in some cases is kind of what's happening just now. So what I'm wanting to happen is I'm wanting to get to the stage where our communities are welcoming and are inclusive and supportive of people living with dementia. There's still a stigma with regards to this. Many people that live with dementia don't necessarily want you to know that they are living with dementia. And there's still a bit of a stigma with regards to it. So if we can get to the stage where our communities are welcoming and inclusive and supportive, then we're going to help a lot of people in the future with regards to this situation. And here's why Mr. Carney and his crew are getting a little bit of a panic with regards to the situation that we're currently in. At the moment in Canada, there's approximately 750,000 people with a diagnosis of dementia. There will be more that haven't got a diagnosis yet or are living with it that never get a diagnosis. But at the moment, there's about 750,000 people. By 2050, there's going to be 1 million more people living in Canada. Now, part of this is the rise in under 65s that are being diagnosed. This is not necessarily because diagnosis is getting better. It's because under 65s are showing signs of dementia now. In Ontario, we're sitting at around about 350,000 people, and that's going to be nearer 1 million by 2050. Now, I never checked my phone before I came in here this morning. I don't think Donald Trump said that there's a cure for dementia, Tylenol perhaps. There isn't a cure for dementia, and by 2050, I would put my house on the fact that we still won't have a cure for dementia. We'll have many things that will perhaps help slow it down, but there will not be a cure, I wouldn't think, for dementia by 2050. So this is something that we're going to have to look at. Many people will be living at home, maybe living with family members. If these family members are going to have to support their family member with dementia, then perhaps they're not going to be able to work all the time. If they're not going to be able to work all the time, they're not going to be paying tax all the time, and hence the reason the government are perhaps concerned about the progression of this. So one of the ways we can get ahead of this is to give some awareness in dementia. Now, some of you may have heard some of this information, and I'm going to give it to you again, and I'm going to throw in some of my experience to the stories that we'll give you. Dementia is an umbrella term. It's an umbrella term for a number of symptoms. So Alzheimer's is a symptom of dementia, vascular symptom, Lewy body symptom, and so on. And one of the ways that I can explain this better, perhaps, is when I was doing a presentation to the Hamilton Police new recruits. One of the young lads said to me there that, so this explains why my granddad's death certificate said dementia and not Alzheimer's. And I said, yeah, that's right. Dementia is the umbrella term for a number of conditions. I'll talk to you briefly about them. There are more than this, but this is the four that we will probably have experience of. Alzheimer's, the most common, 60 to 80% of people that live with dementia live with Alzheimer's as the main symptom of their dementia. And it does a number of things. I'm going to simplify the process, not to patronize you, but just to try and make the understanding a little bit easier. Alzheimer's is a kind of symptom where it mixes up the cycles of memory that we have. So, example, making a cup of tea. I take the mug out of the cupboard, I put the tea bag in, I boil the kettle after filling it with water and so on. We all have our own ways of making our cups of tea and we don't really think about it much. What Alzheimer's will do is it will mix that cycle up. In fact, it will take parts of it perhaps and throw them away so you forget about them in many of the processes that we do without necessarily thinking about them. Vascular dementia is the next most common symptom, with about 20% of people that live with dementia living with vascular as their main symptom. And vascular can be caused by things such as mini strokes. So many people that have mini strokes get vascular dementia, but I have to clarify that by saying not everybody that gets a stroke has dementia, but many people with vascular dementia have had strokes. So there's kind of two sides to that same coin. Lewy body dementia is probably the next most common with about 5 to 15%. And Lewy body is kind of a fascinating thing. Your brain needs a lot of things to work properly, but to simplify it, water, oxygen, and protein is the main things that your brain needs. And with Lewy body, what it can do is it can hold on to proteins. It retains the proteins in the brain. So if we scan the brain of somebody with Lewy body, we'll see some shadows. And again, this causes cognitive disability, such as mobility, where you may have sort of tremors or muscle rigidity. So with Lewy body, we have to be very careful with people's mobility. And the last one that I'll talk about, which is frontal temporal dementia. So frontal, the front, temporal, the side. About 2 to 5% of people live with frontal temporal. I have a friend in Scotland that 6 years ago, he was diagnosed with frontal temporal. He used to be a motorbike racer, not particularly good motorbike racer. He crashed a number of occasions. And they think it was the repetitive concussions that has developed into frontal temporal dementia as he has got older. Bruce Willis is another example of somebody with frontal temporal dementia. And when he was given a diagnosis, he said to his family, "Tell the world my story." And they've been sort of showing his story on social media to allow people to see what the progression is with somebody with frontal temporal. Now, anyone that's very quick at adding things up will have known that that's over 100% when you add them all together. That's because you can have more than one of these symptoms. So my friend 6 years ago was diagnosed with frontal temporal, and 3 years ago his personality changed quite considerably. And he had a second diagnosis of Alzheimer's. So he's now living with these two symptoms of his dementia and having to cope with different things happening with both symptoms. So these are probably the most you're going to see or come across in your life. And there are others, obviously, but we'll just talk about these ones. But what we have to also remember, particularly with older adults, is there are a number of symptoms that will look like dementia, but if we address these symptoms, then we find out that it isn't dementia. So anyone that's worried about symptoms that are happening in an older adult, we need to check these other things first before we go down the route of dementia. And I'm not going to go over them in any huge detail. If I was doing a presentation to employers of companies or whatever, I would probably go over these in greater detail, but I'll skim through some of them for you, just to give you an example. Depression, for example, in older adults is on the rise. And clinical depression, the depression we need to actually treat with medication, is on the rise. Many older adults are feeling excluded a little bit because technology is not, they're not catching up with technology, or they're not seeing their family as much, or they're not in a place that they like, and therefore depression is rising. One of the symptoms of depression is you don't like to do the things you used to like to do, but so is dementia. One of the symptoms of dementia is you no longer like to do the things you used to like to do. But if we treat the depression and perhaps medicate or whatever therapies to help the depression, The symptom goes away. Whew, it wasn't dementia. I'll skip a couple as well, but we'll talk about some of them. Another one, for an example, is medication side effects. Many older adults take a lot of medication. I had a friend recently, she was in her 70s. She phoned me up, somebody I used to work with, and she was saying that she was having all sorts of mistakes that she was making in her daily life. She was having confusion when she was having conversations. I knew she was on liver medication for a genetic liver condition. I knew she was on painkillers because we'd had a climbing accident together, and I knew she was on beta blockers. And I said, go and get your medication checked. And sure enough, the liver medication and the painkillers were competing against each other, and she was kind of overdosing herself. Medication got changed. Wasn't dementia. Delirium. Older adults, particularly ladies with a urine infection, personalities change quite considerably. And I've, again, as a community nurse, on a regular basis, I would get phone calls. Something strange with Mrs. Smith this weekend. Her personality is all over the place. And one of the first things I would ask is, when did you last check her urine? Antibiotics, cranberry juice for a while. Personality goes back to normal. Phew, it wasn't dementia. And things like hearing impairments that aren't corrected, nutritional deficiencies or diets, metabolic disorders like kidney infections or kidney diabetes, or sleep disorders can all show signs that look like dementia but aren't. And we fix these things and the symptoms can perhaps go away. Now, every GP in the land is going to ask you now to check these things out first before we go down the route of dementia. If once these things have been checked, we're still seeing changes in the older adults in our life, this is when we need to start thinking about dementia. Now, remember, importantly, dementia is not a normal part of aging, all right? Losing some of your mental cognitivity, losing some of your mobility, that's a normal part of aging. But some of the things that dementia does is not a normal part of aging. I do road shows on a regular basis where I will be in a hall and I'll have a table with a tablecloth that says the Alzheimer's Society. And every time I do a presentation or every time I do one of these senior fairs, someone will come up to me and look at the table and go, who are you? Alzheimer's Society? Oh, I don't need you yet. And walk away as though it's a definite thing that's going to happen. It's not a definite thing that's going to happen. It's not a normal part of aging. We need to be aware of that. So how can we tell if a person might be living with dementia? So when you're out in the public or when you're at a meeting or you're at a club or however, what are the things that you're potentially going to see that perhaps will help you identify that someone is living with dementia? And again, this is something that I do with councils and police and first responders and all the rest of it to try and get them to think, this person may be living with dementia without necessarily having to have that conversation. So for example, a big thing, the memory changes. Yes, people will forget things more often, but I've already just said to you that's a normal part of aging. But struggling to retain information is more of a dementia type symptom. So, for example, if you've said to somebody on a Sunday that you're going to go and see them at 5 o'clock on the Monday, and every time you go, they've forgotten you were coming, that's something we should be a little bit concerned about. Perhaps when you tell them on Sunday you're going to come and see them on Monday, say to them, what did I just say? As a joke. And perhaps they will repeat back to you, you said you're coming on Monday. They're more likely to retain that information because they've repeated it back to you than if you just tell them you're going to come and see them. There's a couple of things in this presentation that if you take nothing else away, I hope you take these phrases away, and this slide contains one of them. And that allows me to tell you a little story as well. Many people with dementia will change their personality. They become tearful very quickly without any warning. And with no obvious reason. And that's part of the condition. It's not necessarily you've offended them, so please don't take it personally, but it's part of the condition that many people will get upset and tearful for no apparent reason. And one of the things that I need to bring to you, and this is one of the phrases I want you to take away with you from today, is if somebody you know starts acting differently from what is normal for them, no matter how mad and crazy that person is, and we all have mad and crazy relatives and friends, if they start acting differently from what is normal for them, no matter how mad and crazy they are, that's when we should start being a bit concerned, particularly if they're an older adult. I'm going to tell you a story about something that I did when I was in Scotland. I said to you before, or when I was introduced to you, I heard that I worked for the NHS and I worked with people with developmental delay. And that included people that live with Down syndrome. Now, one of the sad things about Down syndrome is that it can show signs of dementia as early as 30. And in Scotland, and you do it over here, I've checked, we do a thing as soon as somebody's 30 living with Down syndrome, we do a thing called a Down's dementia test. So every 6 months, we check that person for dementia. Now, because Down syndrome is a learning disability, the test has to be very, very simple. So it's a picture book. So each client, each patient has a picture book of their own that we use every 6 months, and it's got 20 photographs in it. And my favourite patient of all time, Jack, he loved winding me up. He was a bit of a joker, and it was a nightmare with Jack, but he was a fantastic guy. And I would do his Down's dementia test, and I've been doing it for about 3, 4 years. First picture, you would all recognise it. It was the Houses of Parliament in London. It's that old Gothic building with the clock tower and the River Thames. What's that, Jack? It's the Houses of Parliament, Andy. Second picture, you didn't like the second picture because it kind of patronised him a bit. It was a photograph of an apple and an orange. What's that, Jack? Oh, it's an apple and an orange, Andy. And the third picture was a picture of Prince Charles, King Charles as he now is. Now, Jack was a movie buff, and every 6 months, Jack would tell me that the photograph of Prince Charles was Clint Eastwood, and he would laugh every time he told me that, as though he told me it for the first time in his life. Except the last time that I did Jack's Down's dementia test, when I turned over the picture of Prince Charles and said, "Who's that, Jack?" He said, "Prince Charles." He started acting differently for what was normal to him. He got the question right, but it wasn't right for him because he joked about it every single time. 6 months later, he was given a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. So, very important part. If you see something that's acting different from normal for them, be a little bit concerned. Changes in language and communication. Many people living with dementia, they'll forget simple words or they'll use the wrong words without noticing. So you'll notice it. So there'll be a word in a sentence that's completely nonsense to you, but they'll keep talking. They'll keep continuing with the conversation as though nothing happened. Or they'll have difficulties understanding what others are saying. And another one that I'm actually getting Alzheimer's Ontario to add to this, because it's becoming increasingly more awareness of it, is they may revert back to their first language. And again, and back to Scotland, and don't worry, I'm going to give you some Canadian stories as well. But I worked with a lady that had come to Scotland as a 5-year-old from China. She spoke the Mandarin of a 5-year-old when she was adopted by a Scottish couple. She was brought up in a Scottish school speaking English, with secondary and primary school. She went to university and studied law in English. She practiced law for 40 years in Edinburgh, speaking English. And in over a 3-day period in a care home in Edinburgh, at the age of 85, she reverted back to Mandarin of a 5-year-old. Completely forgot English, but started to speak the 5-year-old Mandarin. This, as I said to you, I've done about 100 presentations now. I've had that from about 15 different people that have said to me, this happened to a member of my family, that they went back to their first language. Now, obviously, Canada, but like many other countries, with the number of people coming in from other countries and maybe having a different first language, this is becoming more common and we're seeing this more often. So they may revert back to their first language. Problems with abstract thinking, and this is where I have an issue when I'm speaking to councils and places like that as well. Many people with dementia will lose the ability to make sense of a symbol and pictures. So for example, the pictures on a washroom, where we look at the pictures of a washroom and we see the symbol of a male and the symbol of a female. The word male and the word female, that stays for a long period of time with people living with dementia. But the symbols is a very complex process. We look at a symbol and we know what it means. And many people living with dementia will lose that ability. So again, signage is something that we need to be aware of in a dementia-friendly community. And being Scottish, where sarcasm is our main form of communication, we have to be very careful because humour isn't understood by many people that live with dementia. So if you're telling somebody a joke, don't be worried if they're not finding you funny. It might not be that your joke's not funny. It might be that their dementia has allowed them to start forgetting what humour means. Again, humour is a very complex brain process. To understand that something somebody's saying isn't necessarily true, but it's funny, very complex brain process. Many people living with dementia will lose that ability to understand humour. Difficulty doing familiar tasks. I'm not going to linger on that. We've talked about that with regards to the cup of tea and misplacing things. And this is where we have to be very, very careful. When I'm talking to people that work with the public, many people living with dementia will lose things more often. They'll put things in unusual places and they'll believe that somebody's taken their item. And I'll explain to you how that works. Living with dementia, and if this pen that I've got in my hand is my most important possession, and I put it down on this table, and because I think it's a really important place and a safe place for me. And if I walk away, over time, I'll probably forget that I put that pen there. But not only that, my brain will tell me that I would never have done it in the first place. So when I tell you I've lost my pen and you find it, my brain's going to say, well, I wouldn't have put it there, so you must have put it there, and I'm going to blame you for moving it in the first place. That's how that kind of works with people living with dementia. So again, when people are working with people with dementia in the public, I have to highlight to them to be careful with that one, because obviously they may be blamed for things they haven't done. Many people with dementia will lose initiative to do the things that they used to like to do. And the problem with dementia is one of the best ways to slow it down is to continue to do the things you used to like to do. So we've got a juxtaposition here. And this is why the councils are doing lots of social programming for older adults, and why we as a society do lots of social programming for older adults as well, to try and keep them doing the things they used to like to do, or to encourage new things in their life, to help new brain connections to be done. And many of your clients and many of the people that you know living with dementia will be disorientated in space. They'll lose track of time. They'll maybe not recognize the day or the year, or they'll become lost in the familiar place. And I'll tell you a little story based on that. I had a phone call from an organization that I trained recently, a supermarket chain. And they were telling me, the training is obviously working. We want to tell you this story. And it was a young lad that was moving the trolleys around in the shopping car park. Moving the shopping carts around. He'd noticed a gentleman sitting in a car, windows closed, in a hot sunny day, hands on the steering wheel, looking through the windshield. And he went to his boss and he said to his boss, I think there's a gentleman here in a little bit of distress. Can you come with me? I don't want to go and approach this gentleman on my own. And they went and they knocked the door. And sure enough, when the gentleman opened the door, he was a little bit upset. And they asked him for ID, and they opened up his wallet, and he had a card from the Alzheimer's Society in it. Long story short, they contacted his wife. What happened was his wife was hanging up pictures in the wall of their house on a Sunday afternoon, and she'd run out of picture hooks. And she'd said to him, and they had been sort of investigating him for dementia, and she'd been telling him to stop driving because he did a couple of incidents. She said to him, leave it, I'll go and get picture hooks later on this week. And away she went through to the garden, actually. And he thought, oh, my darling, I'm going to go and get you picture hooks. He picked up his wallet and he picked up his car keys and he drove to the supermarket. He bought the right picture hooks. He paid for them. He walked to his car, gone. Didn't know who he was, didn't know where he was, didn't know how to get home. They'd gone to that supermarket every Sunday and he got lost in a familiar place. He's doing okay now. A lot of support and a lot of help, and everything's a lot improved with regards to his cognitive ability. But that was an example of somebody very quickly getting lost in a familiar place, despite the fact they were going there regularly. Many other people living with dementia will have challenges understanding visual, spatial information, and particularly people with Lewy body may bump into things or trip over things, or they'll search for things that are right in front of them. They have this change in their spatial awareness that can mean that things are difficult for them to find. And again, something that we need to be very, very careful about with our friends and family that live with dementia. Many people will dress in warm clothing on a hot day or cold clothing on a cold day. But possibly more importantly, many people will make risky financial decisions. That's why I work with some accountancy companies, and I'm training a lot of accountancy companies to help people living with dementia and their families. Sadly, many people that make risky financial decisions, that's only after they've made a risky financial decision that they will lose the capacity to run their own finances. So we try and help support individuals to make all these preparations before it gets to that stage. And sadly, many people will take advantage of this. And this opens up for the chance of many people living with dementia to face a financial abuse because they'll make risky decisions with their finances, and it's something that we need to be aware of and careful about. But the other thing that we're concerned about, and the government's concerned about, is the fact that so many people living with dementia go missing. And 4 out of 10 people that live with dementia will go missing at some point after the diagnosis. And we know that the average time that people go missing is around about 5 hours. And the average distance from being in a safe place to then being found is nearly 9 kilometers. And we have had some pretty sad cases in our area about this. And we've had some cases that, it's turned out okay at the end. So we need to be aware of this, and we need to be aware of how to identify if we feel someone's missing. Now, I had a case just recently when I was actually out with a counsellor just recently, we came out of a building, and I saw a lady that was looking at flowers actually on a stall. And she was looking around her. She was kind of looking to the left and to the right as well as to the flowers. And I went to her and I said, "Are you okay?" And straight away, very, very quickly, she said, "Yes, I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you?" And I went back to the car, and I was with a counsellor, and I said to her, "He's missing. She's missing." And he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I think that lady's missing because she was too quick in saying to me she was okay, and she's looking around. Could you phone the local care home?" And sure enough, he phoned, and they had been looking for her for 2 hours. Many people that will go missing will deny that they're missing when you approach them. So we need to be careful with this as well and aware of this, that we've got this risk of high numbers of people going missing, and many of them will hide the fact that they're missing when we approach them. But how you can identify somebody that may be lost is if they're inappropriately dressed for the weather, if they're standing still, if they're looking around for a long period of time, if they're pacing about or looking confused, or repeating the same question or statement within a short period of time and are an older adult, then there's a good chance this person's missing and we kind of need to do something about it. The first time I did this presentation, I did it to, as I said, Hamilton Police recruits. We never had the photograph of the old lady there. And I said to them, if somebody's missing and they're inappropriately dressed for the weather or standing still or looking around or pacing or looking confused. And they said, "Andy, that's everybody in Hamilton on a Saturday night." So we now have that picture there just to remind everybody this is a dementia course and that's what we're talking about. But joking aside, we have a duty of care. And we should be at a situation that if we see someone like this and we're not necessarily wanting to get involved even, we should be phoning 911 and trying to at least get this looked at as a possibility that somebody's missing here. Other things that can help identify the fact that somebody may be lost or confused is things like MediAlert bracelets. A blue MediAlert bracelet means the person has a memory problem or a memory issue, and a red MediAlert bracelet means there's a medical one. So anyone that's living with dementia that has a MediAlert bracelet, we suggest that they get a blue MediAlert bracelet. And this is on the increased use of MediAlert bracelets. Now, guys are an absolute nightmare. I had patients in Scotland that I know for a fact, as soon as the wife said to them as they were heading out, "Have you got your bracelet on?" They would say, yeah, I've got my bracelet on. The minute they went out the door, they took it off and put it in their pocket because they didn't want their mates knowing they had a MediAlert bracelet. But these are a fantastic tool, and they have on the back of it a number that's a point of contact number. The card I told you about in that gentleman's wallet, some people use our cards, some people print out their own, and it just basically says the person I'm with has dementia and your help and understanding is appreciated. This allows people that if they're in a restaurant or a theatre or a hotel or whatever, if it's a care partner or a loved one, they can give a waiter or an usher or whatever one of these cards. They don't have to have the conversation. They don't have to embarrass anybody. Just give them that card. And that allows that person that's perhaps serving them to think, right, okay, I need to be a little bit more aware in how I'm dealing with this individual. And it helps keep dignity. And obviously Project Lifesaver. Great idea. There's not enough of it around. It needs to be improved and increased. But Project Lifesaver, which is a GPS device on somebody's wrist, which allows the paramedics, should somebody be looking for somebody, to find them quicker and as long as their paramedic van is 3 kilometers away from the person, it beeps and they can help find them. And there's other things as well. There's other apps and things and Apple tags and stuff that can help give somebody a little bit of independence but also have that reassurance and safety that if they go missing, there's ways of trying to help trace and find out where they need to be and so on. And we do things as well with regards to that. We'll ignore Kool-Aid. It's not done very often in Ontario. It's done in other provinces in Canada. But one of the things that we do is what's called a Finding Your Way ID kit. And even if you're not having connections with us, I suggest you do this if you're living with somebody with dementia or you have somebody in your family that's got dementia. It's a form that we take as much information about the person as is possible. And the family keeps one version of the form and we keep a version of the form. So that if they are being looked for, then the family can give the first responders a copy of this. And it gives a lot of information. So things, for example, where did the person used to work? I had two cases in Scotland, one where there was a judge that was in a care home that one day woke up and thought he needed to be in court and was quite aggressive that he had to be in court that day, despite the fact he'd retired for 30 odd years. And sadly, every morning thereafter, woke up thinking he had to be in court. And what the care home did after we did a lot of planning was that we would say to him, no, you're not in court today, but listen, this case has come in and we need you to work on it. And they made fake cases that he would sit and work through. And we worked with the police department to get some information for him, to keep him in his reality and keep him out of that worry of having to be where he thought he had to be. I had another patient that his wife found him, he'd fallen in the walk-in wardrobe in their house because he woke up one day and he used to be a salesman. He thought he had a meeting that he had to go to and he was looking for his suit and he fell within the wardrobe. So this is not uncommon that people will suddenly, with dementia, suddenly think they need to be somewhere that they used to be. So we'll keep all that information. We'll take things such as the normal things like eye color and hair color and all the rest of it. We'll also take things to make sure that we've got every name the person is known by. So for example, my name as I was born was Andrew Gibb, but only my parents called me Andrew. When I went to school, everybody called me Andy Gibb, and all my close friends call me Gibby. So if I ever need one of these forms, Andrew, Andy, and Gibby will be on the form. So that if somebody's looking for me and finds me, they can introduce themselves and they can say Andy or Andrew and Gibby. I'm more likely to respond than Mr. Gibb. I've not been Mr. Gibb since I was a teacher. So it helps that initial interaction with the individual. How do we interact with people living with dementia? And how can we do things? Now, what I always say at the start of this section is if you are living with somebody with dementia or you've got connections with somebody with dementia and things are working, do not change a thing. All right. If it works, don't fix it. All right. You're doing great. But I'm going to talk a couple of things that help with regards to how we can interact with people with dementia, whether it be somebody visiting your church, whether it's somebody in the community, or whether it is somebody that you know at home. These things may help. We should not be afraid to offer help and support with somebody that we may see that we're living with dementia. And one of the most important things we need to do is make sure that if we're speaking to somebody living with dementia, we do it from the front in an open, friendly manner. Now, the reason for this is if I'm standing doing a presentation and for the public, say, and it's face-to-face, not virtual, and I turn round to face the board or whatever, and everyone's behind me, and someone starts speaking to me, I will have an image of these faces in my head, and when I hear the voice, I will know who it is that's speaking to me, and I will turn round and face them. I can do that. So if I hear somebody's voice, I know roughly where it comes from, and I kind of know who it's going to be, and I turn around and I can face them. With someone with dementia, they lose that ability. They might not even know that it's them that they're talking to. So when you're communicating with someone with dementia, it really needs to be from the front so they can see you're communicating with them. Don't be afraid to ask how you can help somebody, and don't avoid making assumptions. If you've got somebody in your life that's living with dementia, you've not seen them for a while, don't assume they're going to be the same when you go and see them again, both positively and negatively. If you've had a negative experience the last time you saw them, don't necessarily believe it's going to be a negative experience when you see them again. And offer simple choices and provide clear instructions when you're communicating with them. We need to make sure we reduce distraction. So when we're talking to people with dementia, and this is why I'm working with the likes of the Royal Bank of Canada and other places as well. My first ever job was working in a bank because my mum was a bank manager. I lasted 4 months. I hated every minute of it. But we never had music playing in the bank. You walk into any branch of a bank now, you've got music, you've got big screens, you've got crowds of people. If you're living with early stage dementia and you're at the teller, that's so distracting. You cannot communicate individually with that individual. So we need to try and reduce distractions. We need to try and make places where we can talk clearly and coherently and making eye contact and using short, simple sentences. And we need to allow the person time to respond. And this is where there's a lot of difficulty when we're living with individuals with dementia. When somebody with dementia has a question, we suggest that you ask the question and you wait. And sometimes it's an uncomfortable time. You need to wait. If there's no response, you would ask the question again, word for word, and you wait. And if there's no response after that second time, perhaps you need to rephrase the question. But the science behind that is if you ask a question to somebody living with dementia, it takes time to process that question. The person will take time to process it. They will then take time to agree or disagree with it. They will then take time to formulate their reply. They will then take time to verbalize their reply. You throw in a second question that wasn't the same as the first one, you're going to short circuit their brain, basically. It's going to be very difficult to communicate with them. So ask a question, wait, ask the question again, exactly word for word, and wait, and then perhaps rephrase your question. And speak slowly and clearly in a comforting tone of voice. Scottish accent helps, I believe. And then finally in this section, supporting a person in their reality. And this is where I get lots of conversations, especially with faith groups and care homes and so on and so on and so on. And it's the second phrase that I hope you take away with you today is in this slide. We need to recognize how the person might be perceiving the situation. This is a scary time for many people. And many people will not tell you they're scared, but many people living with dementia are terrified a lot of the time. We need to recognize and perceive that situation. It is a scary time for many people. And offering a reassurance is not a bad thing. You can offer a reassurance no matter how hard it is for you, if it's a partner or whatever you're living with. Offering a reassurance goes a long way. And here's the second phrase I want you to take away with you. We need to connect, not correct. If Mrs. Smith wakens up in the care home every day and says, "Is my husband coming today?" and the PSW knows that her husband passed away 20 years, they cannot tell her every single day that her husband has passed away for two reasons. One, you're not going to have a very good shift because she won't believe you anyway. Or two, if she does believe you, she's going to grieve every single day you tell her that. What you can say is, "I don't think he's coming today, but listen, you never talk about him. What was his job? How did you meet? Connect with her. Find out about this man that she's wanting to see every single day." If Mrs. Smith says to you, "Where's my purse? Where's my purse? Where's my purse?" and you've told her it's on the kitchen table 100 times, don't keep telling her that. If Mrs. Smith says, "Where's my purse?" say to her, "Do you know what? I've not seen it for a while either. Let's look for it together." Guide her to the kitchen so she finds it herself. Don't you find it, she'll blame you for it. Get her to find it herself. Little things like that help us connect, not correct. The reason behind that is you're not going to get anywhere because they live in a reality where they believe a certain thing. And we need to observe the person's actions and body language. A person living with dementia is still going to have the same body language as you and me. You will know when they are angry. You will know when they're happy. You will know when they're worried and sad through their body language, the same as ourselves. So offer appropriate help, enhance your own communication, and support the person in the reality. And finally, signage, entrances and lighting, flooring, seating, waiting areas, washrooms, background noise, and surfaces. This is something we need to look at and address, and it's probably going to be legislation in a few years' time as well within public buildings and stuff. It's why, again, I work with councils particularly and public places to try and make sure that our signage and our entrances and flooring and seating and all these things are of dementia-friendly environment. So for example, if you have a very light coloured floor that goes into a very dark coloured flooring, someone with dementia, particularly Lewy body, will think that's a step or a hole and will stumble when they come to that. Even although it's a flat floor, we need to be very, very careful what we're doing with regards to these. And that can be the same in the person's house and in your own house. This is a very dementia-friendly building. It's a horrendous color, but it's a dementia-friendly building. If I walked through the door, I could see where reception is. The one issue I have about this photograph is there's symbols on the sign on the wall, but it's at a good height for somebody living with dementia. I know where I'm meant to go when I walk through there. I can see clearly what's a table and what's a chair. There's none of that artsy fartsy stuff that many buildings have in receptions. And I know roughly where I'm supposed to be going because the flooring kind of guides me along that corridor. That's Halton NHS, dementia-friendly building. Or someone's house. Remember I said way back at the start of this, symbols and association with what they are disappears. Words stay. So the fact that that's got fridge on the fridge, that will stay with somebody with living with dementia. This allows this person to live in this house really and not misplace things or find things when they were looking for them. If you look at that picture, the freezer and the dishwasher kind of look the same. In most kitchens, it's going to be the same as that. So it's easy to confuse that. I actually looked to see if the label maker had a label on it saying label maker in this house, but they hadn't quite gone that far with this house. But this allowed this gentleman to live a little bit more safely and independently in his house, and it made it dementia friendly. I know what you guys are going to do because you've invited me to speak to you today, but we're working towards this dementia-friendly community. The goals is for people to live with dementia, to be welcome, to be included and supported in their own community. Now, we have this issue as well with regards to the fact that many communities are age-friendly. And we need to remember, though, that some age-friendly communities are not dementia-friendly. Dementia-friendly communities are always age-friendly. So we need to try and make sure that we're working towards these age-friendly communities and including dementia-friendly as well, because there are differences where we need to adopt to make sure that they're friendly for all people of age. If you want ALS Educate, you can subscribe to ALS Educate by registering with your email address. Lots of new information goes on there. When we see new reports coming through that's been peer reviewed, we'll put them on there. So it's always up to date information, lots of little courses, bits and pieces about specific types of dementia or specific communications. My email address is there as well. If you're in a place that you do not think is dementia friendly and it's within my area, my catchment area of Halton, Brant, Norfolk, Haldimand and Hamilton, let me know. I'll not tell them you told me. I'll go and see them. And if I can train their staff, even better. Because I can do inspections of places to make sure they're dementia friendly for people. Or if there's anything else that you want specifically from this course, I'm the only person in Ontario doing this course full time. Let me know, and I'm more than happy to have a look at it with you. But that's my presentation. I hope that's given you some information. Many of it I'm sure you'll have heard before, but maybe I've put a different spin in it to help you understand it a little bit better. And I thank you very much for giving me the time to share this with you. Thank you.